everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Tech Talks, your weekly source for news and insights at the intersection of cannabis and technology. Shout out to our title sponsor, PolyScience, for supporting this podcast and helping us bring you the latest developments in this exciting field. This is Patricia Miller, Executive Editor. Joining me today is Jackee Riccio. She lives in Humboldt County, California, and she co-founded Cannabis for Conservation. So today we're going to talk about how cannabis and conservation intersect. Thanks for joining us, Jackee. Can you tell me, what inspired you to create Cannabis for Conservation?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I live in Humboldt County, which is, kind of the epicenter of cannabis production, not only in California, but probably anywhere in the U.S. And it's been that way since, the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. So just living here, I obviously have a very involved community with the cannabis industry. And I have many friends that were a part of it. And being a biologist, it just kind of naturally meshed. I went to school at Humboldt State University, and completed the wildlife conservation and management degree, my Bachelor of Science. And I was doing field work, and a lot of the field work that I was doing, I was frustrated from kind of an ethical perspective, because a lot of research is pretty invasive for wildlife. And sometimes it requires the sacrifice of certain individuals, not necessarily like you're killing them, but sometimes you can handle them in ways that's detrimental to their life, and could contribute to their mortality in the long run. So I decided I wanted to do kind of a different approach with my career. And being in Humboldt, I just kind of saw that there was a great need in the cannabis industry for conservation and management, for more sustainability. And I thought, well, I can, try to create an organization that fills that niche. And so I did. And I talked with a lot of other local nonprofits. I got a lot of feedback. I joined a couple of other projects, and I kind of found where the need was the most. And that's really in the kind of land management / functional ecology side. It's not so much in the sustainable cultivation side. There's a lot of people doing that. And so I wanted to create an organization, first of all, in a profit hungry industry at the time, back in 2016. I didn't want to be a for-profit. I wanted to be a nonprofit, because I thought that I would be more approachable to cultivators, and they'd be more willing to participate in our work and in our programs than if we were a for-profit industry, which turned out to be true. And second of all, I wanted our work to focus not on cultivation methods, but more on the land management and ecosystem function aspect of not only having a cultivation, but also just owning a property in a rural area. So a lot of our work focuses on that, and that's what makes us different than kind of the other sustainability organizations, if you will.
So I think I understand that you're more interested in the land management portion of this conservation. So what are your biggest concerns around the ecological footprint of cannabis farming as it pertains to sort of land management?
Sure. Great question. So there's a couple of, I would say, major ecological concerns that not only myself, but most biologists up here are worried about when it comes to not just cannabis cultivation, but any type of agriculture in this area. First and foremost is water usage. We're in a drought. We're in a really bad drought. And it's been more and more evident every year that aquatic life is suffering at the expense of low water levels, or rather because of low water levels, excess nutrients in the water that create these toxic algal blooms, reduce oxygen levels in the water. And a lot of these species, they, aquatic life, and when I when I think about like the most important species really that are impacted in our water courses, it's salmon, it's anadromous fish. And there's a couple reasons for that. They have a very intricate relationship actually with the land up here. So anadromy means they go out to the ocean. They're born in freshwater, they go out to the ocean to grow, and then they come back up to freshwater to spawn. Those fish, when they die, they leave a massive amount of nutrients, marine nutrients that come up to freshwater, and they help to literally like fertilize the land. So they have this very beautiful symbiotic relationship with terrestrial life. Foxes, bears, you name it, they come and eat it. And then when they scat, they're using those marine nutrients, making them more bioavailable for plants, and helping to contribute to the plethora of biodiversity that we have, the terrestrial biodiversity. So water usage is definitely one. There's a bunch of other threatened and endangered species, aquatic species, or semi-aquatic species that are impacted by the water use as well. The second one would just be habitat degradation. So anytime you're removing forest habitat and replacing it with agriculture, that's inherently not kind of wildlife friendly.
Right.
Maybe for certain wildlife, but that's with anything, whether you're planting tomatoes or basil or cannabis. So just the deforestation factor is definitely a thing, and that contributes to lower soil quality. You know, when you destabilize soil and remove all the vegetation, then you get erosion control issues, and that all that sediment then washes into watersheds and contributes to water quality issues. And on that note, I'll say one more thing about the water quality is also these rural roads. So rural roads that have heavy traffic that were not constructed and engineered correctly also produce a ton of sediment, and that sediment severely impacts watersheds and makes it very hard for aquatic life to thrive. And then lastly, I would say the leading issues from cultivation sites, at least before we went through the whole regulatory program, was the use of generators and these kind of remote wild lands, even though they're privately owned. Generators create a lot of noise. They also are gas burning, so they, contribute to carbon in the atmosphere. And they're powering lights. So obviously light deprivation is a type of cultivation that's pretty common here. And the lights are very distracting and sometimes disorienting for nocturnal wildlife. So in combination of the noise and the lights itself, even though people use, blackout tarps, there still can be light escape and glare at night that can be a problem for nocturnal wildlife. So we tried to kind of address a lot of those issues through our organization. And the two that we're focusing on the most right now is watershed health and habitat enhancements and restoration.
Wow, you brought up some really interesting points that I hadn't considered. I'm sure our readers will also be interested to hear. How are you working to help farmers kind of see and address some of those issues?
Well, we've got the two big grants that we just got through the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Those two grants will directly help farmers in both those ways. So the first one is our implementing drought resilient strategies on cannabis farms in Humboldt County. So that program, like the name says, it's going to help farms become more drought resilient. So we're expanding rainwater catchment ponds. We're implementing rainwater catchment systems on roofs. We are establishing water storage tanks so that cultivators don't have to pull from water sources during dry periods. They don't have to pull from their wells. And also so we have what's called a forbearance period. So if you've got a surface water diversion, you cannot pull water. I believe it's April through October now. But it'll allow cultivators to store their water for most of the year. And for some cultivators, we're actually giving them 100% water storage. So they won't need to pull from their wells or acquire water anywhere else once they've stored enough of it during the wintertime. So that's the first way that we're helping with that. The second program that also actually was funded by a CDFW grant, not from one of the ones that we just got, but from a couple of years ago, was for our wildlife conscious certification. And that's a collaboration with Dr. Matt Johnson at Cal Poly Humboldt. We also worked hand in hand with CDFW at the very beginning. We had input from UC Berkeley and International Cannabis Farmers Association and a plethora of cultivators. And we are developing what we're calling this gold standard for wildlife management on cannabis farms. And it's not designed to say that once you implement this, your farm is quote unquote wildlife friendly. We just want people, because that's a very hard claim to justify. Like I said in the beginning, anytime you're removing habitat, you're inherently not, you're inherently not wildlife friendly. So it's kind of a bold claim to say that any type of farm is, I don't want to use the word beneficial, but kind of beneficial to wildlife. So that's why we chose the term wildlife conscious. It's farmers that are trying to make their land a functional agro-ecosystem and enhance that habitat and encourage native species to come back onto their land. So we target species like pollinators, birds, bats, small mammals, all of which are really important to natural nutrient cycling, and to carbon sequestration, the broader cycle of carbon sequestration. So we address kind of that second aspect I was talking about of habitat degradation through the wildlife conscious certification. And then we haven't done a whole heck of a lot yet with the generator noise. I mean, the county, Humboldt County already has pretty strict regulations as to when you can use generators and the requirement of blackout tarps and things like that. So some of that is already getting addressed politically. And there's also been green energy grants through the Department of Cannabis Control. The county received a pretty large grant to help cultivators convert to green energy so they can get solar panels or what have you. Some of that is already getting addressed, and we haven't really developed a program for that yet because of that reason. It's kind of already happening.
Well, that's exciting. That's a lot of, I think, encouraging forward momentum.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wondered about, this is something I wondered about here locally as well. I am also in a drought-prone region. And maybe you can kind of educate me on water catchment. Does it pose a concern for the recharge rate of the local aquifers if you're doing a lot of water catchment?
It actually does not. There was a study that was produced, and I should probably pull it up here, but there was a study that was produced in Humboldt that says essentially it's only like a third of the water that actually comes that actually rains down in the form of precipitation here recharges the aquifer. So there's not a reason to fear that there's not groundwater recharging because you're doing rain catchment. A lot of what's, drought in general, what it does is it dries out the soil to such an extent too, that, the first rain that we actually get, it just kind of runs off the top. And so that is never recharging groundwater aquifers, kind of in the beginning of the rainy season anyway. Mm-hmm. So when cultivators can, I wish I could pan to my window right now. You could see the amount that it is absolutely pouring outside. And there's just water pooling up on the soil and on the lawn because it's so wet here. So no, I think there's an abundance of water, and it's really just a reallocation of it. So as opposed to pulling that water when evaporation rates are higher and during dry periods where we need as much surface water as possible and as much groundwater as possible, storing it now seems to have a pretty good, it has a pretty good effect on water usage during the dry time. So I want to look up, and you can keep asking me questions, but I'll actually send you a source that you can look at that will help explain that a little bit more. That was a study specific to Humboldt about your exact question, and I'll find that and make sure you get that.
Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've just sort of wondered about that personally. So.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, because some people that have these, I don't want to call them big grows, but because Humboldt compared to the rest of the state has actually very, very, very small grows. I think our biggest grow is like 5 acres, which is like a small grow for Santa Barbara,
Yeah.
So yeah, but like when you're storing 500,000 or 750,000 gallons of water, 1 million gallons of water, you would think that that would have an impact on the watershed. And I'm definitely not going to say that it doesn't, because everything that everybody does has an impact on something. It's part of being a being on this planet. There's chain reactions to everything. But I think in certain water courses, the amount that's being caught does not have any type of measurable statistical impact. But yeah, again, I will just send you that source, and you can get that info. Those are numbers I should know off the top of my head, but it just came out not too long ago. So
No,
it's not ingrained in there yet.
No, and you brought up some really important points, I think, in regard to that. On a sort of a larger scale, I know you're working in Humboldt, but for our readers, are there general changes you'd like to see cultivators making to sort of lessen their impact on local ecosystems?
Yeah. Are you talking about like more broadly?
Yeah,
definitely. I think that it is everyone's responsibility, especially, if you're kind of in these rural wildland interfaces. If you're a private landowner and you're a cultivator, I think it's really important to make sure that your farm is a functioning agroecosystem, that it's not just a 5 or 7 acre monoculture with very little biodiversity and very little habitat enhancement for wildlife. And that is, people seem to have this extremely Western Descartesian kind of idea that, people are separate from nature. And that's an ideal that's been held for a really long time. But it's an arrogant ideal. And we are beings that have evolved. Clearly we've undergone evolution. Humans have a niche. Okay. Like we have an ecological niche, and part of that niche is being, a habitat creator. A lot of times where people live, but we've seen this throughout history, where people choose to live, a lot of times they'll create forest clearings, or they'll create these kind of refugia, these grasslands, where, other wildlife like that. I mean, we know that large mammals like that for grazing. We know that small mammals like that. Birds prefer more open areas with trees. We see that in the research. You're always going to find more bird diversity in kind of open, open areas with kind of aggregates of trees, as opposed to like a forest. And so if you are a person that's got, a decent chunk of land, or even a small piece of land, even if you're a person that lives in an apartment building, or you have an indoor cultivation in an urban area, you should be doing urban greening. You should be doing something to either provide little islands or refugia, whether that be, planter boxes outside with native plants for pollinators, native plants that are beneficial to birds, whatever you can do. It's really important. And I would say that the approach that CFC takes is to provide that education and to work directly with farmers, give them the resources, whether that's money or knowledge, to be able to do this. And that is an ideal that is held by, not an ideal, that is a strategy that is held by conservationists worldwide. This has also been explicitly explained in California's 30 by 30 movement, where they'd like to conserve 30% of lands by 2030. working with private ranchers, working with agriculturalists and farmers is one of the number one ways in which we can do that. And preserving that agricultural land in perpetuity and enhancing it for wildlife and for people. It's where we grow our food, but it's also where wildlife can thrive. And a lot of farmers are finding that when you invite native species back, when you increase your biodiversity, your pest management strategies go down. You don't need to do that as much because you're leveraging what native species already do. A lot of times they have better harvests, they have better soil, improved soil health. They have less sediment runoff and things like that into their water courses, which in turn makes riparian areas more healthy. And it's the whole cycle. So I'm sorry if that was a long-winded answer, but essentially, yes, no matter what you are, I think whether you're a small indoor grow in an urban area or whether you're a large monocrop cultivation, everyone needs to be participating in the type of ecosystem support that CFC offers.
I really appreciate that. I guess lastly, I'll ask, if other communities were looking to sort of replicate some of the work CFC is doing, what recommendations might you offer them?
I would say, first and foremost, the best way to do this is to provide the resources for farmers. Doing habitat enhancements is actually pretty expensive. Putting in hedgerows, establishing native plants, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of money. And it takes a lot of knowledge. So if you're in a locality that doesn't have grant programs for that kind of work, I would certainly be talking to your elected officials. I'd be talking to state agencies and try to get a grant program where you can do this kind of work. There's tons of programs available for conservation, wildlife conservation, and agricultural lands through like NRCS, and through a lot of other non-cannabis agricultural agencies like, USDA. So they're available there. They're just not inclusive of cannabis yet. And so I think, getting a stakeholder group together to actually get some funding to do this kind of work is the first step. Otherwise, when you're trying to just do it on your own and find your own funding, we've also done this. We've done this in other states trying to implement our programs. And it's just really hard because when it all boils down to it, farmers don't want to put out, the $25,000 or $30,000 that it takes to do just the first initial enhancement and restoration, And
Yeah.
so, and I understand it. I totally understand it. And that's why like having grant programs is really important. And that's one of the main reasons why we haven't really expanded outside of the state. California's got amazing programs for this right now. And part of that is because we've made our voices heard about what we want and what this area needs. And CDFW has been extremely understanding of that. And so has the DCC. So, in order for this to happen in other states, either they need to make their existing programs for agriculture and conservation applicable to cannabis farms, or they need to create a new fund. And second of all, if anyone is interested in doing these conservation programs, I will give you the blue book for what we have. The blueprints rather. You are welcome to implement our exact conservation programs. We're not hoarding them by any means. If people want to make their land more beneficial to wildlife, by all means, reach out and we'll happily help you create a program.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you shared a lot of great insights. I learned a lot. Are there any, thoughts you'd like to touch on that maybe we didn't hit during our conversation?
Let me see. I feel like I threw a ton of information at you. I'm sorry I rambled so much, but
no,
at
you were
least
thorough and I really appreciate it. I thought a lot of great insights came out. Yeah.
Great. You have enough to pick through then to create an article. But yeah, I think I would say that the last thing that I'll close with, I guess, is that there's such an opportunity with the cannabis industry to really set the standard for an environmental ethic. It's not often that that we see a nascent agricultural industry, coming into play. And we've seen that with cannabis now. And I don't know how many more of these we're going to have. And so, instead of it becoming big ag and, following the food crop model, I think we have a good opportunity to change that paradigm. And I think that's everybody's responsibility, whether you're here or in Washington or Oregon or on the East Coast. I think we all need to make sure that that's a priority in our industry. And it's, we don't have agriculture without healthy ecosystems. And I just think that everyone needs to remember that. And it can't be something that's put on the back burner. We're at a point in the world now where ecological restoration has to be a priority. We're out of time. We know that. We're already seeing really negative effects and huge changes in climate and in seasonality and the way that plants and wildlife native to specific regions have survived for a long time. That's all starting to change. And it's changing pretty rapidly. So I think that we can be that industry, and we're certainly fighting for that and making sure that people hear that that's how we think. And we're just going by example, and showing people what it could be like. And hopefully the work that we're doing here in Humboldt can be shared and spread and emulated across the nation and even worldwide.
If you'd like to learn more about emerging cannabis technologies, be sure to like this podcast and subscribe to Cannabis Tech Talks. You can pick up the most recent issue of Cannabis and Tech Today on Barnes & Noble newsstands across the country, or grab a copy for free on cannatechtoday.com. This podcast is produced in part by Pretty Easy Podcasts. Visit prettyeasypodcasts.com if you're looking for professional production quality at an affordable rate. Until next time, stay elevated.
Hey, hello, I'm Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong. Wait, you didn't think people would know who I am? Durachill. This is Durachill. This is Durachill. This is Durachill. No, hey, I don't talk like that. You want me to sell this? Buy it. Try Durachill or else. If you want something really nice in your laboratory, buy Durachill. You can't go wrong.
This show was produced by Cannabis Tech Today and Pretty Easy Podcasts. Go to prettyeasypodcast.com now if you're looking to get professional production help on your own podcast at an affordable rate. Pretty Easy Podcasts, making podcasting pretty easy.